Alright, everyone. Hello there. My name is Ian, the part-time Dungeon Master. I hope I'm coming in nice and clearly for everyone. This is my first time ever doing this, so I'm trying to make sure I've got everything correct and that everything is coming in nice and clear. I've never really streamed a podcast before, so this is kind of a first thing. So, we are going to start with world building tips, which is something I've been asked to do multiple times over on my YouTube channel, but I've kind of got like almost kind of a sideways way of doing things, because when I first started building the Suriskin campaign that I host on my channel, I didn't use the normal methods that everyone else does, because it just kind of came to me and I didn't really think of a big picture thing. I just kind of thought of little things. I just kind of started my best trying to put them together to make one big thing. So as you can imagine, at first it was all haphazard and definitely a total and complete mess when it comes to normal ways of doing things. And it took many years for it to actually, consolidate into something that could be recognizable as something with potential. But I've since then reworked over the Suriskin campaign and the world that it's in many times, and now I got a better feeling as to how to be a dungeon master, how to write a story, and how to create everything. So it makes it a bit easier for me. So as always, my name is Ian, the part-time dungeon master. Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Corner, and hopefully I'll be able to help you in this little endeavor of ours. So where do we start when it comes to world building? Well, I normally like to start big and then work my way down. At least that's the way that I found works best now that I've tried creating the Suriskin campaign into a D&D world where my players can play in and I can dungeon master in, versus what it was beforehand, which was just a book. So today's is on the gods, goddesses, deities, and pantheons. If you have the Dungeon Master's Guide, there is a section on, chapter 1, if I recall correctly, a world of your own, building the world and changing it and essentially drawing out the big picture of how the world should be in order for you to better convey it to your players, as well as to give it some semblance of consistency. The gods are normally the ones who forge the world from the first embers of life and so on. So I guess a good way of starting would be essentially laying out what gods are in charge of what, and going from there, So for me, I like having at least one god for each domain. Sure, they can have multiple domains and they can overlap, but, let's cover just one god for each domain and work out from there. Because, of course, there's more domains now, but just starting from the basic Dungeon Master's Guide, we have trickery, life, war, light, knowledge, tempest, nature, life, death, and I believe that's just it from the original Dungeon Master's Guide. And you want to have at least one god for each individual. Oh, hello, Commander Root. Thank you for following. That honestly scared the bejesus out of me. So you at least want to have one god for each domain and kind of have it as their main domain. And then from there, they have, I would say, 1 to 2 subdomains that they're also over, or they have some influence into. And that's kind of what the idea is. So for the Suriskin campaign, I have essentially 6 major gods: Asdaris, Modaris, Lipara, and Nalara. Eric's, who, he's not like the others because he's got his own little backstory, and then Sirsalis. Sirsalis is the goddess of creation, and she created the world it is, so her domains are actually life and death. Meanwhile, Asdaris, who is this valiant golden sun god, he is the essentially chivalrous and hot-headed, so he is the god of war and light. Meanwhile, his younger brother, the red sun Modaris, is the god of knowledge and trickery. And it's, it goes on from there, with Lepara being the sea goddess, so she is over tempest and knowledge. Actually, no, she's over tempest and life. And then Nulara, which is the goddess of the moon, she is over nature, and I want to say I put her over trickery as well. It's kind of hard to fully understand everything. I'm sorry, no, it's not fully hard to understand everything. It's hard to bring this all back from my memory and from my notes, because the way I write my notes is very haphazard. So I do apologize also if the audio starts cutting out at any time, or if things start seeming kind of meh. You can catch any of my videos that I do here on Twitch, again, in full, uninterrupted quality over on YouTube, where I'll, of course, be having a little bit clearer voice, as my upload speed is sometimes complete crap. So, when it came to the Sriscan gods, the 6 main deities and everything, they are known as the Thessalian gods, and they are the primary pantheon for this world. And I figured from them we can work out to everything else. What about other pantheons and other gods? Well, there are still some left, ones that cover the other domains as well. Such as there is Harun, the god of nature. He just does nature. He's not a Thessalian god, but at the same time, he's not one of the quote-unquote old gods that are banned from worship, because the Thessalian gods not only did their best to wipe them out, but they kind of took over the land and forced the other gods out. This is something that you should consider when you're writing your gods, as, are they in a pantheon? Are they constantly warring? Do they get along? And if they aren't on the same pantheon, do they at least get along enough to where their followers, their clerics, their paladins, and all that won't start attacking each other? As such, as once again with Harun is the god of nature. He is a being of nature, and such druids tend to worship him, and there are a couple of clerics who worship him as well. But for the most part, he is just nature. He simply is. He has no feeling one way or another. He simply cares about nature and nothing else. Nature is, it is born, it is born, and then it dies, and it flourishes throughout the entire process. Through its death, it gives rise to more. So, that was something that I had to consider when I was writing for the Sriscan campaign, and writing the world itself for not only, my book that I was futilely trying to write, but also for the campaign and for my players, was that he was a god who did not truly belong with the Thessalian gods, but his worship was never outlawed because he is such a beacon of neutrality. Of course, there's other gods. There's the dwarven god of the forest, Ungar. There's Garodar, the platinum dragon, and so on. And these are essentially known as lesser gods compared to the Thessalian gods. But they are still recognized, and their worship is allowed, as they aided the Thessalian gods when they took over the lands from the old gods. And of course, some of the old gods are still around, such as Fleneth, Velth of the Pale Rem. Actually, I think there's still quite a few old gods still around in my world, and these old gods aren't quite gone yet. They still have followers out there. They still have people worshiping them in secret and so on. And this is also important when it comes to gods, goddesses, deities, and pantheons, is how many are outlawed, and are they willing to work together? Such as if you have 2 gods who are essentially their worship is outlawed in your empire that you currently are running, do the 2 gods work together in order to spread their influence into the empire by, using their followers and so on? Or do they not like each other enough to work together, and such they kind of are the bane of each other's existence? Like whenever one starts getting ahead of the other, they strike at them to try and weaken them, to prevent them from getting ahead. Of course, when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, you can write the Pantheon or the gods as however you want. You can even make it to where there's only one god and there is not many gods. That's the fun part about Dungeons and Dragons, is that the fact it can change, it can be something new and different every time that you play, but at the same time, you can use things that you're familiar with or just make something up completely. And then, when it comes to also the followers of the gods, what do they tend to be like? Are they primarily dwarves because they follow the dwarven god Ungar, who is the god of the forge? Or do they allow other races to worship them as well? And if so, why is this race allowed? Or is this race simply, included on it? Or is the god itself just inclusive and allows, regardless of what race you are, to worship it? Or perhaps maybe even your god doesn't like a particular race. I know that for me, Asdaris, the Radiant Sun, does not like drow or dark elves and things of the Underdark. So whenever one of the Underdark comes to the surface, the reason why they don't like the sunlight, well, it's said because they don't like the sunlight because of Asdaris' radiant glow forcing them back down. And followers of Asdaris tend to try and hunt any Underdark creatures that come to the surface, because, once again, they don't like them. But at the same time, there are some gods that are a little odd. Eric's, the god of hell in my world, he doesn't really like worshippers on the mortal plane. He currently is trying to get an iron fist over hell itself, because he took over it from other old gods as well as other demon lords. So he's proclaimed himself god, and he's still trying to get control over all of hell. And it's been a difficult process, and he doesn't particularly like it when some mortal on the mortal plane decides to start worshipping him and summoning demons to the mortal plane, because that causes a hole that he has to plug. So he sends out his little Hell Knights to go fix the plug. Normally in a very brutal and bloody fashion, but that's just how Eric's works. But still, there are other gods out there who enjoy worship. There are some that are so fickle that unless you worship only them, and for a very long time, well, then they start giving you power or benefits or boons. But at the same time, there are some that are benevolent enough to where even if you pray to them once, they are willing to show you a kindness in hopes that you will continue to pray to them. Because the way you kill a god, at least in many of the ways that I've seen written in the many books I've read, is that essentially you deny them worshippers. You kill off their worshippers and force them to essentially rely on what little they have left, and you continue killing off their worshippers until no one is left to worship them or even remembers them, and you starve them of their power. And let's see. And that's, a relationship between the humanoids and the gods. Did these gods create the humans, or the mortals? Did they create the dragonborns in their image? Did they create the tieflings? Well, actually, no, they wouldn't have created the tieflings. That's more of a demons, devils, and fiends thing. But did they create the elves? How did they create them? What is their relationship with the mortals? And why do the mortals continuously worship them? Is there a benefit to worshiping them, or is it more of to honor them for giving them life, and so on? Like I said, though, I want to at least have one god for each domain, but then you also can have overlapping domains, such as when you turn into the Dawn of War deities in your Dungeon Master's Guide, you can see that Grummush, the god of destruction, also is Tempest and War, but at the same time, Melora, the goddess of wilderness and the sea, is Nature and Tempest. They overlap on that section. Anyways, moving on from just only the Pantheon, or the idea of... Actually, moving on to the idea of Pantheons, it's more of how do these gods work together? Are they like the Greek gods, in which they work together because they are gods, but at the same time they still fight and squabble with each other? Or are they closer to a divine pantheon that truly upholds righteousness and honor, and they all work together for a greater good? Or is it closer to a loose alliance, that they just sort of, they're there because, well, there's no other being like them out there, so they have someone to communicate with, someone to talk with, other than the mortals. The relationship between the gods and the mortals is important, but so is the relationship between the gods and the other gods. Anyways, I hope this sounded okay and everything sounded good. Once again, my name is Ian, the Part-Time Dungeon Master. You can find me on YouTube at Ian Part-Time DM, and I hope you join me there or here for the next Dungeon Master's Corners podcast, and I hope everything goes well. Catch you next time.